Hello and welcome to the Pokemon world. My name is Professor Treepun. People love to jump to the conclusion that Pokemon is completely illogical, which by the end of this video you'll see is completely untrue. So what you should really remember is Pokemon incorporates a lot of maths, psychology, history, symbolism, nightmare fuel, and science. So really I go from forum to forum thinking about why this is weak to that or why this is strong against that, and people really have no answer for it except that Pokemon logic, like I just mentioned. Which obviously you get a whole development team, why are they just gonna go, oh yeah, that's gonna get weak against that? You know, it's kind of weird to think that. So this is the moment. Some type of advantages might make more sense than others. Some might be more obvious than others. Some might not make sense, but they do to me, so that's pretty much the only thing that matters. So with that done and said and done, let's go on with the show. Plants can't survive in extremely hot temperatures because they're highly flammable. Because water isn't petrol and firefighters use it. I'm not a scientist, I'm not going to explain why water puts out fire. Grass needs water to grow because grass absorbs the minerals and nutrients from the water. Plants really need to stay on the ground to survive. If they're taken up in the air, they can't absorb any nutrients and whatever, and they're too close to the sun. So that could be a possibility there. Most of the flying weaknesses are due to immobility in the air. Okay, electricity has the chance to paralyze, so flying Pokemon in the air, shocked, can't really fly anymore, down, dead, yeah, pretty much. Hence why Thunder always does 100% against the flying type. Alright, this is the scientific part. You always get an earth wire and a live wire. The live wire has, you know, a lot of electricity flowing around it, whereas the earth wire has a layer around it which allows electricity to conduct and pretty much absorbs the current. It's like the two types of copper wire, unshielded twisted pair and shielded twisted pair. The shielded twisted pair is the one that insulates it all, so pretty much that's what the ground type kind of does. It doesn't just repel electricity, it does quite the opposite, it absorbs it. Think of the major aspect of the ground as earthquake and magnitude. Now since grass and plants are all anchored through the ground, they won't get affected much by earthquake or magnitude because pretty much they can't lose their balance because they are part of the earth and the soil. A lot of bugs eat grass and a lot of bugs have razor sharp needles and scissors and teeth to bite through them. Pretty much on crops and plants you get pests. Think about the scene from Scorpion King. Remember when he's buried from the neck down and that march of fire ants are coming at him? Well, what's he do? He eats them, but the other guy just torches them up. You know, you can just fire them up and they die instantly. It's like burning an ant with a magnifying glass. Cruel as it is, it happens. Fire makes rocks pretty much more destructive. When you fire, rocks get hot enough, they become magma, you know, that kind of stuff. And plus you've got a campfire, you know, if you put rocks around it, the fire can't escape anywhere besides that. And if you pretty much cover a fire with rocks, it'll put the fire out. And I think it also has something to do with because you're piling a fire with rocks, it doesn't have enough of a source of oxygen to keep on being lit. So that might be a possibility as well. Rocks are porous, which means they can absorb water, and this means that they are also more brittle than they once were when they were hardened. It also causes the rocks to expand in mass, and because the particles are separated out there, you know, a solid is forming, you know, more liquid particles and spacing them out a little bit. That's also what happens. Water conducts electricity, what more do I have to say? It's the same kind of thing what I mentioned with electric and ground. Grass and plants are earthed, so they can't really be affected as much by grass. But they can be affected a little bit because it's still the source of unshielded twisted pair, etc. You know, it's not exactly that they're directly underground, they still have a visible part of them on the ground, but they won't be shocked as much. Fungus feeds off a lot of plants, and that's how it spreads. Remember, plants are living things too, so they suffer the same effects as normal people, but probably plants, I think, have less of an immune system than us, so that would mean that fungi would pretty much take over them a bit more, and which is why they feed off them, etc. A lot of viruses are mostly airborne, so keeping them underground traps them from that. Ice does pretty much the same thing to mud as what water does, makes it soggy. You know, makes it weak, makes it less solid. Because when it defrosts, then it becomes soggy. Logic! Congrats for figuring this one out. Dirt puts out fire. You've seen it in the Pokemon episode when Celadon Gym is on fire. Now I mentioned before about a bug's small body structure. Well, ground, when it does earthquake and stuff, the bug is so small that it won't actually be affected as much by it as someone of my size would be. Bugs are invertebrates, so they have an exoskeleton compared to us who have an internal skeleton and a backbone. So if a rock smashes a bug's exoskeleton, which is more heavily exposed, then it'll pretty much smash the whole bug. This is pretty much the toughness of steel. It's self-explanatory. Metal conducts heat, and you're probably asking, well, why doesn't fire get affected as much by steel? Well, that's because even though it's conducted by heat as well, that fire is also hot enough to melt steel. Weld it. Bend it. But, I don't know, melt it, mercury. I don't know, just go with that. Rocks and steels have a pretty rigid structure, right? So when it comes to ground is the only thing that is dismantling their structure. When basically an earthquake happens and you have a tall building made up of rocks and metal, the building can collapse. It's strong enough to punch through steel, strong enough to break rock, and strong enough to break the ice. Woo! Unless you're a Dragon Ball Z character, you can't really punch that much in the air. Like I mentioned before, flying pretty much immobilizes a lot of different types when they're being brought up into the air, so a fighting type is totally going to be vulnerable in the air. Again, toughness of steel, flying won't hit it as much, and same as normal. Again, strength against normal, pretty much the same kind of logic there. This is an interesting one because it actually references brain over brawn. See how that works? So since Psychic is mainly associated with the mind, you've seen a lot of Pokedex entries for Psychic types like Alakazam and Metagross. Ghost, Dark, and Bug, all common fears. Makes a lot of sense. This is pretty much Ghost is spiritual and Normal is physical, so they can't exactly interact with each other. This is one thing that a lot of people don't understand. Ghosts can turn evil, evil spirits, and that's what darkness represents. And that's usually depicted as bad, so you have a ghost, you have the normal spirit, and then it gets converted into something bigger, like possession or a poltergeist, for example. And that's pretty much what darkness is representing. It's representing that, and also could be representing hell. And hell is usually the bad place. This is a part where it's not exactly logical as much as it is metaphorical. So pretty much, fighting represents good, fighting crime, superheroes, and how they overcome villains, darkness. Bad, evil. This is kind of linking to what I said earlier about Rock and Bug, which kind of like fighting doesn't make sense when it comes to how fighting should be strong enough to crush bugs. But then again, you get a swarm of bugs against one fighter, you probably would be better off using a flamethrower than your fists against a herd of cockroaches. Another weird one, Bug not very effective against Ghost. It could be pretty much that bugs are relative to normal types but have their own kind of special moveset, which only does half damage to Ghost types. That's pretty much the only thing I can come up with for that one. Ghosts are pretty much dead. They died because of poison. So really, poison doesn't affect ghosts that much because of that. Still, they can still be possessed, they can still probably have their own ghost sickness, as said in Supernatural, but in all, they're already dead. This is something that actually was on a forum as well. Pretty much the placebo effect, if you've ever heard of that. Basically, you take a drug or something that doesn't actually do anything, but you think it does, so your mind tells you that you feel better. It's pretty much that. Pretty much the Psychic represents positivity in that sense. Remember what we said about the common fears before? Well, Ghost, Darkness, and Bug, mixed with Psychic as well. The mind, steel, nerves of steel, that's what it is. Some metals seem to have their own toxicity levels. When it comes to these toxicity levels, it doesn't actually rely on the amount of poison or toxic that you have, but the concentration of it. So more poison won't really do anything. Contaminate the metal by putting it in a reservoir or whatever, but another way to reverse the effect is by bioaccumulation. Again, toughness, dragon, dragons are pretty much normal kind of moves. Now, all of these are elements of nature, and dragons possess elements of nature, which is why they'd be quite resistant to these elements of nature. Because when it comes to grass, you get moves like Energy Ball. However, when it comes to ice, remember the Ice Age? Reptiles, dragons, they're all cold-blooded, so when they freeze, motherfuckers. And it's the final one, which pretty much dragon is usually depicted as the strongest type there is in Pokemon. And if you've ever watched The Incredibles, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, pretty much at the end of the movie with Mr. Incredible, he says that the only thing strong enough to penetrate it is itself, so pretty much the same kind of thing comes into play. The only thing strong enough to take on a dragon is a dragon. And dragons also possess different elements that other dragons may not be used to, so that may also be a factor. So that's pretty much it for the video. So just because some typing doesn't have much logic to it doesn't really mean that it doesn't have any meaning to it whatsoever. It's pretty much Pokemon. It's more supernatural than anything else. Not pretty much physics go beyond it. So yeah, this will be continuing a series. If you have any other requests that I don't know about, tell me them. And besides from that, thank you for watching. Lights out. Right, slow down. I should have said this from the very beginning, and I didn't actually do 2 types that I should have done, so here we go. We haven't done water and steel, and ice and flying. Why did we not do that? I don't know. It's stupid. Those are pretty big ones. So water and steel. Now this pretty much might be because steel is heavy, and water relies on density to grow. Yes, that is how I kind of depicted that. No. Basically, you know, density, something heavy goes into water, the water rises because, you know, dense and stuff. Well, maybe that's a possibility. I don't think it's the possibility of steel rusting or whatever, because I'm not sure. It might be stainless steel, and stainless steel doesn't rust as easy, doesn't have as much as a reaction point. And if that was the case, then water would do strong damage against steel. And then there's another point at which, when it comes to force equals mass times acceleration, and this force gets degraded within water, so something as heavy as steel trying to go through water, and it's heavy enough, doesn't really do much. Like a submarine can't really move that fast. And ice and flying, pretty much birds migrate during the winter to somewhere that's warmer, meaning they can't exactly handle cold temperatures. So this might mean as well that because of that, ice will do stronger against them. Plus they're higher up in the air, which means there's a lot of moisture in the air, pretty much higher up. There's a lot of lower temperatures, higher up, 1,000 meters or something like that. As well, ice will immobilize the flying type's ability to fly, because that is what flying does. Pointing out the obvious. Yeah. So yes, I basically advanced 2 days in the future to tell you that. Thank you, and lights out. Again.